Good evening. Welcome everybody. So happy that you're all here. At our third, I think, event this year in our event series, a new era won't come about by itself, I think. Sorry for the bad translation. Die neue Zeit kommt nicht von allein. I'm very happy to introduce my guest today. Many of you will know him, Richard Seymour. Richard Seymour is a writer based in the UK. His last book, which we'll talk about, among other things today, is Disaster Nationalism, the Downfall of Liberal Civilization. He's the founding editor of the Salvage magazine. He appears regularly on several podcasts like Politics Theory Other. He publishes widely in platforms like The Guardian, the London Review of Books, the New Left Review, and others. And he is one of the sharpest commentators that I know on current affairs, always from a firmly Marxist grounding. And I'm very happy that you made it to Vienna, as I found out today, for the first time to do an event. Very welcome, Richard. Before we start talking, just give me a few minutes to explain what this evening is going to look like. I see some familiar faces, so you will forgive me for explaining things that you already know. As I've said, this event is part of a series that we do 4 times a year. In the end, I will tell you what comes next. This is a long evening, so we will speak for about an hour, then we will take a break. We'll come back and the event will finish around 9:15, 9:30. We hope that you will have a nice time and stay and have a beer, have a drink, chat in the break and after. I'm feeling this is very loud, or I'm getting a lot of feedback. I don't know what the problem is. Is it just my problem, or is anybody else? Yeah, it's too loud? No? It is? Okay, no, okay. So I'm asking, I don't know what it is. Hall, Rückkopplung? No? It's getting some help? Okay, I mean, I will survive, but it feels a bit... Okay? Okay, I will manage. Thank you. So it just sounds different than normal. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. As I said, most of the evening will be a conversation between Richard and myself. This is better. Yes, thank you. Much better. And in the end, there will be a space for questions. I will explain how that works before the break. The event tonight, as you have gathered probably, will take place in English. I know that for most of us, English is probably not our first language, so we'll try to speak slowly, and I've asked Richard to try to speak a bit more simply than he might normally do. I will check in with you in between to see how it's going. If we're going too fast or if you have trouble following, maybe just, give me a sign so we can adjust. I think that was all the housekeeping. Didn't forget anything. In terms of topic, what are we going to talk about? I forgot to introduce myself and Attack. Sorry. Always something. If you don't know us, who is hosting this evening, we're Attack. We're a social movement organization. We come out of the globalization movement. We're founded 25 years ago. We work on a broad issue of economic policies, of justice issues, from trade, financial markets, to food policy, agriculture, feminist issues, and our current campaign is against militarization and rearmament. If you're interested in that, you can check in with my colleagues at the info table. And my name is Lisa Mittendrein. I've been with Attack, I think it's over 15 years now. And I work on economic policy, and I have the very big privilege to host this talk series now for the 3rd year, which is just, it's a privilege, as I've said. Because I get to invite the people that help me understand the world and share some of the knowledge with all of you. So I'm glad to do that today with Richard. Our topic for the evening, we've called the evening, what if everything only gets worse? The most negative title, or pessimistic title we've had so far, I think. Solidarity in a time of catastrophe. And we want to talk about how politics is changing in this time of permanent crisis. I wrote the title and the text for this event sometime in January, and everything has gotten so much worse again already. So we will not only talk about Richard's book, Disaster Nationalism, and what about all these changes and this political and economic and ecological situation means for the left and left strategy. I want to spend a lot of time on that today. But we will take advantage of having Richard here, who is always worth listening to on international politics, and we will start by talking about Iran and the current war in the Middle East and what all of that means. We'll start out by asking you something about yourself. I think you might have to turn on the mic. I didn't do that before. I apologize. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became politically active and what shaped you as a political person?
Yeah, you can all hear me, right? Good.
Yeah.
So, I became a socialist because I read Oscar Wilde, Soul of Man Under Socialism. And that was me, young, romantic, you know, into Wordsworth and all of that sort of stuff. I'm not really bothered about all that smelly, lefty, selling newspapers kind of activity. But I got to London and I thought, what am I going to do to be a socialist? And I thought about joining the Labour Party, and then I had a look at the Labour Party and I thought, no. I joined instead a Trotskyist organisation, the Socialist Workers' Party. No need to go into its many flaws. Suffice to say, it was an attempt to recover a classical tradition of socialist organising perverted by Stalinism. That was the idea anyway. Anyway, I left the organisation around 2013, and as some of you probably know, this is because a senior member was accused of raping a young woman, and they covered it up. I don't know anything more about the allegations than you do, just they covered it up. That was enough for a bunch of us to leave and, you know, cause a split. And from that, we formed, we decided we're not going to launch a new organisation. Well, we tried to launch a new organisation, but like many new organisations, it became a circular firing squad. Everyone firing at one another. So that fell apart. That was a disaster. But we launched a publication, Salvage, which attempted to articulate a pessimistic but nonetheless yearning kind of revolutionary socialism. And, you know, I think that's broadly been my trajectory. I went through the Corbyn moment like everybody else, but I remain a Marxist.
I think this type of pessimism that you just mentioned, you know, pessimism that doesn't mean giving up, is something we will definitely get into more in the course of the evening. I just wanted to say the first row is mainly empty. I see people standing. I know it's like in school, nobody wants to sit in the front, but there's some space there. So, niceties aside, we're just going to pivot and start talking about Iran. I think we did enough easing ourselves into. I kept checking my phone on the way here if we already know, you know, have any updates. As I've said, you know, things keep changing so fast. We've been, I think it's 6 weeks, a bit more than 6 weeks into this war. We've had this very shaky ceasefire negotiations on the weekend between the US and Iran that didn't work, that fell apart. Now we had the threat of the US announcing that now they themselves will block the Strait of Hormuz. Could you give us your take? Where are we now with this war, and what do you think are we're looking at in the next few days and weeks?
Well, Trump's a fucking genius. I think that it's very difficult to read into this war any coherent strategy on the part of the United States. Israel has a strategy. They know what they want. By and large, permanent war. They do not acknowledge any borders. I mean, obviously they have borders, but they don't acknowledge the legitimacy of any borders. They have expansionist goals, and I think regional chaos is a fairly good way for them to demolish rivals and annex territory. The United States, I think, kind of got into this war by a combination of factors. Default is one way to talk about it. Ever since the Iran nuclear deal negotiated by Obama, I mean, a very flawed deal in some ways, but not for the usual reasons. It was a form of subjugation of Iran in one way, but Iran had agreed to not pursue a nuclear weapon. As soon as Trump tore that up, and I think that was 2018, am I right? So the deal lasted for 3 years, but already it was opposed really strongly, of course by Israel, but in addition to that by a faction in American politics, which you could call the Israel faction, because that's how they understand foreign policy. Chuck Schumer, Lindsey Graham, people like that, for whom Israel is, this is just about how American politics works. They opposed it, and to that extent, it was always pretty clear there was going to be a backlash. That deal fell apart. The next question is, what's going to happen in Iran as a consequence? What did happen was that the reformers were utterly discredited. They completely lost the initiative. I know that there's a tendency in talking about Iran to talk in these big categories about hardliners versus reformers. That's not very helpful, but just on foreign policy terms, certainly the more hardline forces were going to win. And in American politics, of course, that catalyzed the surge of a much more Iran-hostile faction of American politics. Biden made no serious effort to resuscitate the Iran nuclear deal, despite having said that he would. And so I think that as soon as Trump decided, upon getting elected, and forcing through a ceasefire, if you recall, in, I think, February 2025, as soon as he got bounced by, essentially, I think what happened was that he started waffling one day about how he was going to take control of Gaza and rebuild it, and it was going to be fabulous. It was going to be the best thing ever, the Trump Gaza Strip. And it was going to have gold statues everywhere and things like that. And he got carried away, and Netanyahu, you could literally watch him looking at Trump and his face just going wide. This is incredible. And I think that he glazed Trump, to use the jargon of the youth. He flattered him, he praised him. He said, this is going to be the best thing you ever did. You should join with us. You should help us do that. And of course, after that, ceasefire broke down, and they're bombing Iran. So as soon as they have already bombed Iran, I think Iran knew back in the summer that another war was coming. I think China knew that another war was coming. And that's why they started stockpiling intensively on the oil, because they knew where that would go. And I think that what pushed it over the edge, I mean, based on all the reporting we have, largely from the New York Times and so on, Trump listened to Lindsey Graham, he listened to Netanyahu, he listened to the most militaristic forces within his cabinet, and nobody was around to really push back. I mean, you would expect J.D. Vance, who supposedly is a skeptic of these things, to push back. Of course he didn't. And I think Trump decided to go for it because he was told, this is going to be easy. This will be a couple of days tops. Look what you just did in Venezuela. It was so simple. You can have that victory today, tomorrow, the next day. And of course I think that Trump I don't think he was ever interested in a long-haul war. I think he wants spectacular displays of power that give him cheap and easy wins, like abducting Nicolas Maduro. like bombing ships in the Caribbean, you know. Stuff that doesn't bring about any real domestic cost, that makes him look powerful. And the MAGA base, by the way, they were supposed to be skeptical of wars and all the rest of it, they actually like that stuff. So I think it's a kind of, rather than strategy, you've got an etiology. Does that make sense? It's just a pathway of causes without any real forethought or strategic intelligence.
I think it's so remarkable because we spoke a little bit about this earlier, like as Marxists or as critical thinkers of other kinds, we don't attribute that much to the individual personality of a politician or president. We go to analyze, you know, the class forces and the capital factions and the interests, how they align in the moment and everything. But then we have this president who plays a much larger role as a person, with all his personality traits and his wishes and desires, as you have described, in political decisions. And I wanted to ask you what this, both the war and this role that Trump is playing, is telling us about the role of the United States in the world and about its decline as a hegemon.
Yeah, I think those two things are connected. I think Montesquieu has a line somewhere. If an empire falls because of an accident, the question is, why did it only take an accident for the empire to fall? And if Trump is able to lead America into such a total disaster, and I'll briefly explain why it's a disaster in a moment, the question is, how did the American state, which was built up over a century to be capable of extraordinary global command, which had, NATO, for example, dozens of militaries at its disposal, airfields, docks, ports, etc. Governments ready to muck in and help out whenever America wants. Global economic hegemony. International institutions that reflect the interests of the American ruling class. And Trump has been burning that since he got in. Now, that was already on the way down, it was already declining. But what did Trump do as soon as he got in? Doge, Musk, they start slashing the apparatuses of the state. They eviscerate US aid, so that's soft power, but they also go after the National Security Council. And the National Security Council would be where you would get some sort of strategy. Not necessarily a good thing for us on the left, because these are the bastards who drove the genocide in Gaza in tandem with Netanyahu. But a serious imperialist strategy. He eviscerated all that. And also, you know, the usual professional chain of command by which a policy is deliberated over and there's real intelligence and insight brought in, that's gone. It's a small circle of people around Trump making decisions, and he chose yes men. He chose people who are too stupid, apart from anything else, to stand up to him. Can you imagine Pete Hegseth coming up with a reasoned opposition to anything that Trump wants to do, if he could even conceive of having a reasoned opposition? So I think that is an example of imperial decay. And at moments of decay, the immanent rationality of a system, and it's only rational within its own terms, you know, the terms of the American ruling class, inverts into total irrationality, total chaos. And at that point, since everything pivots on Trump within the executive, and since the mechanisms of accountability that they used to call the deep state, if you remember, all that's gone. So that is, and just one last thing on that point. The Democrats had 4 years in office in which they could have instituted procedures, changes of law, changes of structure. They could have put Trump in jail. They could have done any number of things to protect their system, and they didn't. Rather, what they did was they basically adopted Trump Term 1's main foreign policy lines on Israel and on China. So they were complicit. And then final point on this, why is it a strategic disaster? Well, I mean, you can all see what's happened. The fact that they now have to threaten to destroy a civilization in order to unblock the Hormuz Straits, which were open beforehand. The fact that Iran has just proved that it has effective sovereignty over the Hormuz Straits, and thus enormous leverage over global shipping and energy supplies. Just like with the tariffs, by the way, Liberation Day, remember 100%, 150% tariffs on China? By the autumn, Trump is cozying up to China. Oh, no, we're not going to have these tariffs. China suddenly looks really powerful, and is really powerful, and is more powerful because a latent power in terms of China's leverage over global shipping, its control of rare earth metals, its control of its dominance in world trade, its dominance in commerce across the global south, not America anymore, is brought out to the fore. I think it's exactly the same thing. They brought out a strength that Iran kind of knew that it could rely on, but it's never been tested. It's now been tested and proved. And so now, as you know, they say, you can't blockade the strait because we're going to blockade the strait. We haven't even seen the costs of the existing blockade yet. That's still feeding through the system. The last shipment of oil from the Hormuz Strait reached the United Kingdom last week. It takes weeks for them to go around because these tankers travel about the speed of a bicycle. Once the costs start hitting, I mean, everyone's going to be affected. It's not just a question of whether you have oil or not. The global price, the price is set globally. The price is going to go up for everyone, and it's going to go up, it's going to affect those countries that are most oil intensive relative to GDP. Countries like America. So think about this. Trump has decided to sink the world economy because he cannot countenance the possibility of walking away and declaring and acknowledging a strategic defeat. Somebody needs to persuade him. Just tell him, no, you've won. You've won. You can just walk away and just say you've won.
I think I will get back to the question of consequences, but I think it's so remarkable that the United States, as you know, the hegemon and the most powerful economy in the world, was supposed to keep the global economy running, to safeguard its functioning, its institutions, you know, its channels of, you know, having goods flowing. If I think back to the financial crisis that was caused by the American financial system going bust, after that, the central bank moved in, they extended swap lines across the globe.
We're going to have our sphere of influence, which is the West, wherever that happens to be. And China can do what it wants over there, if it can, you know, if they can outmaneuver us and outflank us. And we're just going to have a world broken up in spheres of influence, and we'll just do whatever we want in that sphere. We'll plunder. And I think underlying that is some idea that if America could just be more, like with capitalism in general, if we can get rid of all these politically correct, woke constraints, you know, all this stuff about health and safety and the environment and so on, if we could just drill, baby, drill, then we will be strong and powerful. And we can be much more aggressive and much more brutal than anybody else. We've got all the power. They don't have the cards. So if we can do that, then we're going to prevail ultimately in the competition. That's the idea. Like I say, I think it's not going to work. But I think that's why it's easy for Trump to say, well, we're going to think about walking away from NATO, even though NATO is a massive advantage for America, because as far as Trump and his coterie are concerned, Europe's going to the dogs. Europe's becoming a Muslim continent. Europe's going all woke and politically correct, and the only way it can be saved, and essentially, rather than try and rely on Europe as an ally in the future, or as a set of vassals more appropriately, it would be better to maybe conceive a bit like they used to think of Latin America. You've got to go in and overthrow governments. You've got to promote the far right. You've got to promote, it didn't go so well for them in Hungary recently, but I think that's the basic idea. So hegemony is over.
Thank you. And maybe to wrap up this part, you already started talking about the consequences of the war for the rest of the world. You know, besides the region, we already have several thousand dead in the region, of course. And you said that the oil is only now starting to dry up. Like we've seen already the influence to oil markets, the price increasing. What else do you think is coming in terms of effects for other parts of the world?
We're living in a moment of unreality because we have, for example, Trump was on the news just yesterday, I think, saying, you know what, the stock market values are fine. Gas prices have gone up, but not by as much as you would have thought. It's fine. And he might even believe that, because his advisors would be telling him that. I wondered myself, why are the stock markets underpricing the risk? As most energy specialists, for example, Helen Thompson is pretty good on this, most energy specialists will say that's exactly what's happening. And indeed, if you look at the interviews with shipping CEOs, finance CEOs, they're all saying the same thing. The world is not ready for what's coming. I think in part, this reflects what Keynes talked about with regard to the stock markets. It's not a beauty contest. It's a contest to see who everybody else thinks is prettiest. In other words, people investing in the stock market go by convention. If they can guess who everybody else thinks is prettiest, in other words, which stocks and so on other people think are most valuable, etc., then they'll make money, as long as the convention lasts, until a point at which it implodes because it can no longer be sustained. I think that's a part of it. All sorts of other possible explanations. I think also they've been putting too much credibility into what the Trump administration says, because what you get is Trump sends out the feelers via Scott Bessent. You know, they give briefings, they say, make dovish briefings, essentially saying we're looking for a solution here, this isn't going to go on for very long. And then Trump makes a crazy speech. And they're told, don't listen to the crazy speech, that's for the birds. Listen to what we're telling you. I think that's part of what's going on. In terms of what's coming, it's different depending on where you are. Obviously the Global South, and particular parts of the Global South, are already being hammered. India, for example, has suffered actual shortages. South Korea, you know, you're having rationing of energy use. There's parts of the world that it's not about high prices. They will literally not be able to buy oil. That might happen to the UK. You would think not, but the UK has extremely poor energy resiliency, because for years, decades, we've gone for a just-in-time energy system. No slack, no stockpiling. Obviously, the destruction of the coal miners as a class strategy left the British energy system a lot more susceptible. But for as long as you could believe in globalization and sort of neoliberal patterns of accumulation, then you could believe that the energy would come, no problem. Well, that's over. So lots of countries are going to start experiencing real shortages. On top of that, the materials with which you make fertilizers come from, like for example urea, will come from Gulf countries. Large quantities of that stuff. The timing was terrible for this war, because as soon as that stopped happening, it meant that the fertilizers would not be there for the planting season, the growing season. So it'll be, maybe we'll start seeing effects by the summer and autumn. You won't see it immediately, but food prices are going to go up across the board, and of course food shortages in large parts of the world, particularly poorer parts of the global south. And then flights. You're going to find that flights are going to be harder to get, not just across the Middle East. Kerosene is really important for air travel, and there's not going to be enough of it. I don't think that's intrinsically a bad thing, but it will be rather inconvenient if you have to visit family or something and suddenly you can't fly. And it's going to put a huge dent in GDP. Basically, what I would say is, and I know this is going to sound a bit cynical, I'm not cynical because I'm really worried. I'm worried for myself, I'm worried for other people, and I'm worried particularly for those who are least offended. But just reading it strategically, politically for a moment, I think anybody who pinned their colours to this war is politically screwed. At the outset of this war, I'm sure you don't waste your time following a provincial country like the United Kingdom. But in the United Kingdom, the right wing and the far right initially came out, all guns blazing, supporting this war. Within a few days, it was like, we realised we'd made a big, massive strategic mistake, and they backed off. I think any party or government that is behind this war, that is giving cover for this war, has done anything to support this war, is going to be politically dead within a couple of years. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we could go on talking about this the whole evening. We will not. Sorry. But I think, yes, more good stuff is coming. I will use this moment to check in how we're doing language-wise. Is it going okay? Speed okay? Okay? Excellent, thank you. So if that changes, let us know. Thank you as well. I want to pivot, and of course it's all related, and we'll probably get back to that. But as I've said in the introduction, your most recent book is called Disaster Nationalism. By the way, I've been wondering, is there a German translation planned or nothing happening yet?
I haven't heard of any plans for a German translation. If you know any German publishers that would like to run it,
I don't know if our friends from Mandelbaum Verlag are not here tonight, but we will check
in touch with Verso.
We will check in. Okay, so sadly you will have now to buy the English language edition at our info stand. But yeah, so your most recent book is Disaster Nationalism. Can you start us off by just telling us what is disaster nationalism?
It's a term that I came up with to not use the term fascism, because the term fascism is overused and it kind of obscures the debate. And also because I think we're in an intermediate phase between, I suppose, ordinary civic nationalism, you know, Scottish nationalism, that kind of thing, the ordinary everyday nationalism, what Michael Billig called the banal nationalism of, you know, waving the flag and supporting your football team and being bigoted towards migrants and all of that sort of stuff that constitutes the everyday patriotism, and outright fascism. Another reason it's called disaster nationalism, apart from the tribute to Naomi Klein and her concept of disaster capitalism, is that these new far-right movements are obsessed with salacious, sensational atrocities that they've just made up. White genocide. Back in the Tea Party movement, if you remember, around early 2010s, they used to have a belief that Obama's healthcare reforms were going to result in death panels. That their elderly relatives would be put on a list and there would be death panels. And also Obama was going to start putting random people up in camps. Often, as we see, this turns out to be projection. But they are fascinated with ideas of extreme evil being done to them. So we've had white genocide, great replacement, we've had the QAnon conspiracy theory of a global elite of satanic, communist pedophiles. From Hollywood to the White House to the Bundesbank or whatever. And there are local variations. In India, for example, one theory of extreme evil being done to the nation is called the Romeo Jihad, or the love jihad. And what that means is they believe that these virile, handsome, young Muslim men are coming over here and seducing local people. Decided that it was Antifa, a seditious conspiracy that they believed were out to kill all the conservative white Christians. And since they couldn't do it face to face because, you know, try that in a small town, we'll kill you, they were setting fires. The evidence, I mean, first of all, just to be clear, they weren't told to say this or think this by Donald Trump or somebody. They came up with this by themselves on social media apps like Nextdoor and Facebook. They spread the rumors, they shared pictures, which could be of anything, but which they said represented arson by Antifa activists. And they started to arm themselves and form guards and block roads. And there were gentlemen there, armed to the teeth, who were told, you need to leave. It's a level 3 emergency. That means you stay, you die. And they said, I'm not leaving because if I see people doing crap, I'm going to hurt them. Now, I feel that. I know what that feeling is. I get it, because if somebody's coming for me and mine, I may not be wise, it may not be morally smart, but I want to hurt them. I get it. And also, if it's climate change, I can't point a gun at climate change. I can't shoot capitalism. Those are big, unwieldy, difficult problems. And if I'm a conservative white Christian, they don't even exist. But a problem that comes in an artificially concrete form, a human form, an enemy that I can take up arms against, that's exciting. Why is it exciting? Because it brings a perception of threat that is already there unconsciously to the level of consciousness. We all can experience the world as alien and hostile. It does things to us. It throws us out of our jobs. It gives us diseases. It smacks us around. It causes us to fail. We, it seems, don't have anything to do with it. Even though the world we live in is collectively produced by us, it appears as something alien, doing something to us. The term Lukács had for this, of course, was reification, when the world appears to you as a dead thing or as some demiurge. What's a simpler term for that? Like a god. That, you know, like when we talk about the markets, for example, you ever hear this on the news? They say, will the markets have confidence in what the government has been doing? Who are the markets? The markets are just a bunch of investors with leverage because they have a lot of money. The markets are not a god or a demiurge, but we experience the world in that way. Now, one way to rebel against this reified, hostile world that appears to be attacking us is to say, all the bad things that you're experiencing, it didn't just happen. If you read the cultural Marxism conspiracy, for example, there's a guy called William S. Lind, who's an American right-winger, one of the original coiners of the cultural Marxism conspiracy. And he says, America 50 years ago was a great place. It was a great place. Why is it so terrible? Well, it didn't just happen. People did it. These Jewish intellectuals came over here from Germany with an alien ideology and permeated our institutions and imposed on us this doctrine of cultural Marxism cooked up by Antonio Gramsci and Georgi Lukács to bring down Western civilization, because they realized, these Marxists, they realized the revolution didn't work. Their economics was wrong. The class didn't get behind them, so they needed to subvert the culture to destroy the strongholds of resilience against totalitarianism, destroy Christianity, destroy heterosexuality, destroy the white male, destroy patriarchy. And you've got a sense of intentionality, of somebody who actually set out to do these things to you. You can do something about that. You can fight that. So I think that, I'm sorry I've gone on a bit, but just to wrap it up, I think that that is, if you have been deprived of the means to act effectively, politically, collectively, well, this is a consolation prize. And if you're conservative and you don't want to challenge the system, it's a way of seeming to be very radical. You know, like QAnon fantasized about a day of the rope, a day of the storm. We're going to execute all these people in public. That sounds radical, but it leaves the system intact.
You said with the example for Oregon, you know, the people came up with this by themselves. Of course, certain of the tropes, they were there beforehand, you know, like the Antifa is actually doing all the George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter, they're out to kill our militia, all that was out there and it became reappropriated. But not all of this is like a bottom-up phenomenon. No? So how does the far right, the organized far right parties and politicians use this, embrace it, cause it? What is their relationship to this phenomenon?
I think that what you have on the far right is a series of what you could call, to again use the stock market language, speculative bids. They come up with a bid, an idea. We're going to go after the immigrants. We're now talking about Pizzagate. Do you remember Pizzagate? Right? This was the conspiracy theory that children were being trafficked out of a pizza parlor in, I think it was Washington, DC. And a guy went, he was armed to the teeth, he went to check it out. Turned out they weren't trafficking children there. But then it's pivoted on to QAnon and various other things. In other words, you've got various intellectuals, influencers, political leaders, podcasters and so on. You've got these ecosystems of people trying things out and seeing what sticks. And it's almost like an evolutionary system where certain memes get selected for. And then beyond that, you've got the political manipulation of what I would call the social industry. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, actually, I'm sorry, that's just reflecting my age. Does anybody still use? Huh? Meta. No, but what I mean is nobody uses these platforms. You know, TikTok. What do you young people use? But the point is that they learned how to orchestrate waves of harassment, aggression, excitement, energy on these platforms. And the way in which it works is that, if you're on, for my sins, I use Twitter. I'm not calling it X. It's Twitter. For my sins, I use Twitter. And one of the ways in which that works is it relies upon people regularly getting themselves worked up by the issue of the day. It could be the outburst of a novelist like Helen DeWitt, it could be something that a politician has said, whatever, and you have to have very strong feelings about it and post about it relentlessly. And the way the medium works is it pushes this stuff into your feed to make you feel a particular way and get catharsis by thumb typing. And that's not all the platforms, but that's how these platforms work, particularly text-based platforms. So it's designed to get you wrapped up in a particular wave of emotion. And we're always cresting towards some sort of climax over the issue of the day. And they worked out how to manipulate that. So for example, we know that Jair Bolsonaro, former president of Brazil, ran an office of hate, where the idea was to use online agitation to destroy people. It's not about debate. Their top intellectual on the right there, Olavo de Carvalho, I think his name is, said very clearly, this is not about debate. We're not trying to win a battle of ideas. We want to destroy them, destroy their careers, destroy their reputations. Unsaid, but just as important, maybe, just maybe get them killed. Stochastic terrorism, incite someone to kill them. BJP in India, the Hindu nationalist movement, they have an enemies list. They put it out to the pro-BJP trolls. These are our enemies, go after them. And they don't even have to, it's not like they get on the phone to somebody. They just set the tone by launching an official attack on somebody. And the trolls will then take it way further than the official forces will do. Will start calling, calling for people to be raped, to be murdered, and sometimes somebody will be murdered. In the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte won his election campaign in part by orchestrating waves of sentiment on social media, and this is really instructive how he did this. They hired troll farms, of course, but it's not enough to have troll farms. They took control of or set up local Facebook and social media pages based on your local city or town or village, and they would cover local issues most of the time. But so that it basically gamed the media, because the media had to say, oh, everybody's talking about this big issue. And it gamed the polls as well, because suddenly the polls start to reflect this big issue that everybody's talking about. It only started with a troll farm of about 100 people, and suddenly everybody's talking about it. So you manipulate, you orchestrate rhythms. And then just one final point about this, I often wonder, I think part of what people get involved in these movements is, it's a sham of participation. It's not real participation. When a troll in Indian Twitter is followed by Narendra Modi, he follows very few people, so he's very selective, but he picks loyal trolls. When a troll is followed, they put on their Twitter bio, blessed to be followed by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's a big honour. Now what's happened there? They have joined in, they've participated, they've been recognised, but have they gained control over anything? No. They've been used for a strategy they don't understand. And my point would be, quite a lot of people who support these far-right movements, they don't want to take back control, as the slogan had it. They don't want to be in control of anything. They want to be the tools of strategies that they don't need to have any insight over. In a way, it's the old fantasy, which comes out of the 19th century, of being an instrument of divine justice. I think that's the Count of Monte Cristo, I think that's what a lot of these people want.
Thank you. And you've spoken about some rather diverse situations. You have more in the book. I think we'll not broaden it here, but like as you said, the rural population in Oregon, followers of Modi in India, you've mentioned Bolsonaro, but we see this of course also in Europe. You've mentioned COVID. I think COVID was an excellent example of a very real existing threat, and then a disaster fantasy that said it's not the virus that's the actual danger, it's the vaccine that's going to control us and make us all into zombies to serve whoever. Which somehow seems more calming than the pandemic. And what is it that, you've mentioned something already, but I'd like to get into it more. What is it that makes people and societies susceptible to these theories and to this search for an explainable and disaster that can be attacked and fought? What is the societal basis of this? Let's
start with COVID. the fantasy was, as you remember, that it was the Fourth Reich, right? If they can get everybody wearing masks, muzzles more like, and if they can get everybody willingly subjecting themselves to these injections, and social distancing, which you may remember, social distancing is communism. If they can regiment and routinize everybody in this way, everybody doing the same things in exactly the same way because the government tells them to, then the fantasy is that's breaking people's minds to create the basis for the Fourth Reich. And there was a lot of literature on this, and a lot of the opposition used explicitly anti-Nazi language, even though these were incipiently fascist movements.
Same here.
Yeah. So the question is, where does that come from? Why do people want that? What's the social basis for it? Well, a good study was done by, I think it was Quinn Slobodian, and I can't remember the name of his co-writer, so if he ever hears about this, forgive me. But essentially it was a study of the diagonalist movement in Germany. And what they found was that, surprisingly, quite a lot of these people had been progressives. They'd been, beyond pensant progressives. They voted Greens. They maybe vaguely supported Die Linke. They were they were not reactionaries, but they were educated, progressive, middle-class people. And then COVID came along. What changed? As soon as COVID comes along, the sovereign individual, which we've all heard about under neoliberalism, the idea that the individual is the center of rational decision-making, that society doesn't exist, that we're all just rational actors, that becomes countercultural, because actually, suddenly, it's not that everybody else is a risk to you, that you have to calculate, they're all competitors, they're all out to get me. No, suddenly you might be a risk to other people. You might be carrying the virus without knowing it. And you have to calibrate your actions to care for other people. And suddenly the government is saying to you in a big way, actually society does exist, and you might have to modulate your behavior so that society can continue to exist. And a lot of people did not want to hear that. A lot of people found essentially, I would argue that it's the politics of people who want to have the benefits of living in a society without paying the price. The price in COVID was pretty harsh. I remember it was horrible being locked down. It was horrible social distancing. Even the masks weren't that comfortable. I didn't care about the injections, but there were real privations and discomforts. And in principle, you could imagine a movement rebelling against that as being pro-social. We just want to meet each other, we want to have parties, we don't want to follow these stupid rules. But essentially their argument was, if I want to go to a restaurant without a mask on and risk everybody else's health, well, I should be allowed to. So there's an ideology of the sovereign individual, which I think it's important to recognize is a fantasy. As I think it was Christopher Lasch, who could be quite conservative, but one point that he made was, in this era when we're talking about the individual has never been weaker. We talk about the individual, but we're all much more subject to these blind forces of the market and government bureaucracies that are totally unresponsive to us. The individual has never been weaker, and I think that's just been true. So, in essence, I think you get a bunch of people who were by and large more content with the status quo than they knew. They thought of themselves as critical, cynical, wised up, but ultimately they didn't really want anything to change. And the telling phrase that Slobodian and his co-writer come up with is, fighting together to be left alone. They want to be left alone. Now, does that explain all conspiracy theories? No. I think by and large, conspiracy theories, the social basis of it is of people who have been thrown into crisis that they do not want to cognize, to think about in systemic terms. By and large, it's the spontaneous ideology of large groups of people who've experienced relative decline over many years, sometimes over a generation. It's not the left behinds, it's not specifically the middle class, and it's not specifically the rich. It could be from any type of class background, as long as you've experienced a trajectory of decline and you do not see that in systemic terms, then you're more attracted to othering theories of the immigrants did this to me, the cultural Marxists did this to me, the cosmopolitan elites did this to me. And so that raises a question. I guess I'll sort of try and wrap up my point with this. Failure is at the core of this, I think. And failure has always been a difficult experience. We all fail, and it's always shaming and horrible. Even if it's not our fault, whatever the reasons, it's experienced as shameful, and some cultures are more shameful than others. But it's way worse than it used to be because we've had 40 years of neoliberalism. And neoliberalism told us, you are on your own. There is no society, there are only individuals. An individual, what is an individual? It's a risk-taking entrepreneur. An individual is basically a corporation, an enterprise, with a bunch of different types of capitals. You've got your erotic capital, you've got your physical capital, you've got your cognitive capital. Whatever you have can be called capital, so long as you can put it into circulation to get back money, to get an income stream. And it also said, everybody else is your enemy. They're all competing. So anybody could be the one to stick the knife in. So the spontaneous ideology is paranoid. They're all out to get me. And it also said, anybody who talks to you about public interest is a liar and a hypocrite. Public interest just means state bureaucrats and their clients ripping off the public. The only really efficient way to organize society is to recognize our innate greediness, our rational self-interest, and to organize all institutions and the society around it. On top of that, you then get, as the slope of inequality gets steeper, you get ideologies of social Darwinism. Because we're all competitive risk takers, whoever fails deserves to fail. Whoever succeeds, obviously, is the cream of the crop. Everybody who succeeds is worth emulating. So, on the one hand, we have television programs about people on benefits, belittling and mocking them. Or about people who can't pay their debts and the bailiffs we're supposed to despise and kick. Migrants too, asylum seekers. But the people we're supposed to admire and emulate, Donald Trump, on The Apprentice. He's a celebrity, he's a hero, we should all be like him. The richest person in the world today is Elon Musk. I defy you to tell me that you would encourage your child to grow up like him. But that's the culture of neoliberalism. These are successful people, be like them. So, and this is the point I'm coming to, you get a culture of sadism. It's no longer just a misfortune that you fail. It's now something to be punished for. It's something toxic, it's shameful. The thing that you thought gave you distinction and gave you recognition, maybe you ran a successful business, maybe you were, a better paid worker or whatever. Now you risk being plunged into the mass of toiling humanity, into the mass of working people who have no status, people who you, just a few days ago, thought were scum. People who you thought should work for you. Now you might become one of them. It becomes toxic. And in that circumstance, it's attractive to look for a way to channel your resentment that doesn't challenge or subvert the system by which you have made your living.
And which is all you know, probably.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you've mentioned several factors, and I think we'll get back to them after the break. We've spoken about inequality, about the breakdown of social institutions, about neoliberal ideology, what it does to the self, about shame and punishment, and I think some of it we'll return to when we, after the break, go into what all of this means for the left, for politics that thrives for emancipation, for freedom, for an overthrow of capitalism. And this is my cue for the break. I hope that's okay for you. Just for all of you to know, in the end of the second part, so after the break we'll do another half hour of talk and then we'll have questions. And because it's really hard to see and we're a lot of people, the way we do questions here is through Slido. You have a flyer on your chair or bench with a QR code or a link, and there you can enter your question. If you don't have a smartphone or you don't want to do it that way, you can go to my colleague Hannah there in the back on the corner. She's waving and she will enter your question for you. To know if you want, so then you can also go in, you can see all the questions, you can vote. And we will pick, usually we pick the most voted question unless for some reason they're just jokesters or very similar. Then you will allow us to choose differently. But usually that's what we do. So you can vote. If you ask a question and you would like to ask the question yourself, then you can put your name. If you don't want to ask it yourself and you want us to read it out loud, just stay anonymous, don't put a name, you can still put the question. That's how that works. It will take 15 minutes and meet back here. Enjoy your break. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I know that break can always be a bit longer, but we don't want to be here until 11. So we'll start to continue slowly. The rest of the people will just join us. Just a reminder, if you haven't checked the Slido yet, you can still do it, you can still vote. But of course you should also listen to the conversation, so we'll see how that goes. If you have been here before, you know that after the break, before I go into the second part, I like to do a round of what I call Schnellraterunde or rapid fire questions. I have a number of short questions to ask Richard and ask him to answer with either a word or one sentence. Okay? So just to demonstrate how this works, cats or dogs?
Cats.
Excellent, very well done. For some reason most of the guests say cats. Dogs are great too, but for some reason most of the guests say cats. What is an action, a campaign, or a political experience that has shaped you?
Stop the War movement in the UK. First mass movement, truly mass movement I participated in.
Which was? Against which war?
Iraq.
Iraq, what, 2003?
Yeah.
Reform or revolution?
Both. Best reformists are revolutionaries.
Okay, a very common answer, thank you. What, very good answer that some of our other great guests, some of which are here tonight, have given us one. What book or intellectual has been important for you recently?
David Bentley Hart, The Experience of God, which may surprise you. Do you want me to explain?
One sentence. You can explain, because?
Because it made an argument against a materialist account of consciousness, which I found utterly compelling and completely changed my mind.
Sounds very interesting, thank you. Luxury communism or degrowth?
Fuck both of them. Neither.
So we'll get into that in the last part. What is ecosocialism?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be here. I would be organising
The
it.
latest book was called something ecosocialism. So.
Right, okay. But you want a sentence.
You can also do one word, if you want.
Ecosocialism, I imagine, is revolutionary socialism under the conditions of acknowledged planetary constraints.
Thank you. And if this was easy, you would get another guest, you know, so we don't have you for the easy questions. Party or movement?
Party.
Take control of the state or abolish the state?
First one, then the other.
What is courage?
It's being afraid and doing it anyway.
And what gives you hope?
The unknown. Most of the good things that happen in the world tend to come from forces that we didn't expect.
Thank you so much. I don't tell them this before. I tell them we're going to do the rapid fire questions, but I don't tell them the questions, so just that you know. We're not play acting. Thank you. I know this is a bit different. I'm happy that we have the time to now spend this third segment after the break to talk about left strategy and what the condition of the world, the one crisis after another, and we cannot seem to catch our breath, the ecological catastrophe ahead and already happening, and the worsening of living conditions, what all of this means for us who are actually aiming for a better world. And I wanted to get started with maybe a small, well, let's try to how short bit on that, on the emotional responses that the escalating climate crisis, ecological crisis provokes in us, and how we deal with that as leftists, as socialists.
I think at first there is a case for a kind of mourning. Not because mourning is where we want to get stuck. It's a very bad place to get stuck. The whole point of mourning is to move on. Mourning is, in psychoanalytic terms, distinguished from melancholia. Melancholia means you're stuck. It means you haven't even acknowledged your mourning. It means all you experience is, in Freudian terms, rather than you've lost something, you've experienced a fatal deficit in yourself. Something is wrong with you. That's melancholia. Mourning is when you realize that these things that you value in the world at some point will never again exist. And it may be people that you love, but it may also be environments that you love. It may also be, I mean, there is some literature on this, on environmental melancholia, based on field work among people who are asked to discuss, for example, lakes around Michigan or whatever, and the pollution that has happened there and the environmental destruction, and people respond at first in a fairly passive way. Oh, it's nothing to do with me. And it sounds like apathy. But as they're asked to go on and continue talking, it becomes clear that they have really powerful emotional relationships with these environments. Often childhood memories. You know, I don't know what it was like for you, but I grew up in a small town in Northern Ireland, surrounded by farmers and fields and rivers and what, you know, like, as soon as I got to London, I wanted to forget all about that, you know, fields and farmers, don't forget about all that. I want air conditioning, I want nightclubs, you know, whatever. But I realized, in the context of the climate crisis, actually I really care about this stuff. I want it to exist. And I don't want it to be polluted. And it became clear that they really actually did care about these destroyed environments, these desecrated environments, but had kind of like most of us, most of the time, things go wrong around us. It's like, I can't do anything about it, so I'm going to shut that off. It's got nothing to do with me. In the same way that people become fatalistic about politics and they say, well, okay, then politicians don't care about me, I'm not going to care about them, I'm just going to look after me and mine. You retreat to a survivalist mentality. And that is condescendingly described by the political class as apathy. No, it's the detachment of people who've been fucked over, who've been victimized, who've been deprived of any real say over their lives. And in this case, deprived of any opportunity to affect what happens to environments that they care about. And so they decide, well, that, my job doesn't hinge on that, so I don't care. Mourning is the first sort of starting point of coming to terms with what's going to happen, with what's already happening. And it also shows up some things that we didn't know. Sometimes when you start that process, you come to recognize unacknowledged dependencies. When you start to read about, for example, food chains that are deteriorating, and it turns out that we all have these dependencies on the unacknowledged labor, to put it that way, of the honeybee, for example. We all depend on the work of the earthworm. Darwin knew about this, we kind of forgot about it. We all depend upon our relations, our social relations with non-human animals. And we depend upon all these environments. And we have a rational capacity to organize the planet, both for our betterment and for the betterment of other species and other lives and so on. But that capacity has been appropriated by capital. It's been black-boxed. That rational capacity has been turned into the capacity to create monocultures and to deforest and to shoot up plumes of burned fossil energy made by trees that died in the Carboniferous era into the atmosphere, all of that sort of stuff. It's been taken away from us. So the starting point is the mourning and the recognition of unacknowledged dependencies, but then you have to move on and form an attachment to what you want to save. You can't save everything. Some damage is already baked in, right? The catastrophe is already on us. So then, I remember talking to a Lacanian analyst. He said, I often one of the most liberatory moments when dealing with patients, actually I'm fucked. Because that moment the analyst can say, okay, given that everything is fucked, given that your life is ruined, given that nothing works anymore, what do you actually want? Never mind what will please mummy and daddy, what will please the big other, never mind what you should want, never mind what's realistic, what do you actually want? And at that point you can take a leap into the unknown. That's the emotional threshold that we want to reach.
I think that's really beautiful, and we'll try to carry that into the political threshold, like a little bit later. Like, how do we make this step from acknowledging how fucked everything is to the leap into where we really want to go? There's a strategy that, or an approach that is discussed, I think, in many parts of the left all over, in the UK and here and other places. You call that bread and butter politics, as an answer to the rise of the far right and the general disengagement also of people with politics, for which they have very good reasons. And I'm sorry, but I will quote your own book at you now, because I think this is an excellent quote, and then I will ask you to elaborate on it. You say, so if it wasn't clear, bread and butter politics would be a politics that centers like the imminent material needs of people and puts that in the center of a left, a left policy. We do need bread and butter, we even like it, but we don't love it. And the things we do love often don't give us any material benefit whatsoever. The ideas that people love and hold dear are often ideas for which they are prepared to sacrifice a great deal. So, what is your what is your problem with bread and butter politics? Do we need it? Do we not need it? Do we need something else?
We do need some bread and butter, and there are real material privations out there. Although you do get a sense if you go through a degrowth phase or a kind of moralistic anti-imperialism phase, you start to realize that, even the working class in these countries, we're not actually, we're not the proletariat of the 19th century. I think the major condition for the working class in Europe is actually precarity. It's like anything can happen at any moment to destroy your life. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. So to answer your question, the example like this basic drive, this socializing, universalizing drive, but the point is in struggle, and not just in struggle, struggle doesn't do everything, you've got to have the argument. In struggle and by arguing with people, by persuading people who are in struggle with you, that actually their old ideas don't make any sense, and it would make sense to universalize their ideas, to say, hey, look, I don't deserve to be treated like this, then nobody deserves to be treated like this. We all should be fighting for a better life for ourselves. But ultimately, I do think we need to revive something like the totalizing horizon of communist transformation. And I think that would be the only thing that would be adequate to the challenge of climate change.
You've started talking about organizing, and what the experience of organizing does to people. They might come together because of an immediate material interest, a material need, but then the organizing does so much more. It does not only help you to achieve maybe the higher wages or the reopening of the school or whatever you were organizing for, but it gives you a structure, a social structure, many of which we have lost over the last decades, so union membership, but also other more the traditional conservative structures like churches, extended families. All of these social structures have weakened. So would you say, again maybe a bit of a suggested question, but that question of organizing and organization is, besides this question of passion and the totalizing horizon and communism, that organizing and organization would be a third sort of pillar to look towards and work on.
It depends what we mean by organization. First of all, just to undercut any sort of sense that I might be romanticizing organization, every organization that I've personally been involved in has failed in one way or another, and some of them failed quite disastrously. When I mentioned the Socialist Workers' Party and the splits there, when we tried to form another organization, the International Socialist Network, we actually made an organization that was worse than the original, which is why I would never encourage anybody to take organizing advice from me. I'm useless at this. But nonetheless, it's trial and error. I think Rodrigo Nunes is quite insightful about the sort of ecological sort of character of organizing. There can be different kinds of organizing bids, there can be different kinds of organizing structures that can cohere together within a sort of a coherent ecology. So failure was built into that process, and it's not the end of the world. And I've become a bit more patient over time. I used to be extremely impatient and want everything to happen tomorrow.
And if it keeps failing, why do we still need to do it?
Because there's no alternative. What are we going to do? Not organize? Okay, then we can all go home and watch porn on Twitter or whatever. That's what they're basically getting their money from now. We can retreat to the culture industry, the social industry. We can enjoy our servitude. That's the option. We have to, unfortunately, and I hate this as much as anybody else does, we have to get together. We have to start, liking one another. Or even, getting along with one another. I'm a miserable, antisocial sort of person. I don't really like going out and meeting people. But this is the only way you get things done. So I'm sorry if that sort of seems like a flippant way to answer your question, but to put it in more serious terms, we wouldn't be where we are today if it didn't actually work sometimes. You know, it keeps failing, sure, but you can fail better next time.
Everything we have.
Well,
most things that we have because people organized for them and fought for them.
yes.
And didn't say it's not worth it. And I think with a view of the time as we're going to have to wrap it up soon so we can still take some questions. Maybe we can bring it together in a last question. We talked a little bit about the time horizon, you know, and the politics and the catastrophe. Some people are asking the questions whether it's time to give up, you know, we cannot change anything anymore, do we just have to adapt to a world that is getting worse? I don't think we can discuss that in much detail now, but the way I hear you're saying is it's not an option to give up. And with Salvage magazine you have this idea of salvage communism, so a communism in the ruins as you call it. Can you tell us a bit, to wrap up, why you think we still need a long-term horizon for leftist politics and what that is?
Yeah, to be clear, when we say communism, the ruins, and salvaging what can be salvaged, this is not catastrophizing. Well, it is a little bit, but I think, as Walter Benjamin said, the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency is the norm, right? So it's not that, you know, in the future there will be this rubble. Accumulation, capital accumulation is the rubble. Progress, in Benjamin's terms, is the rubble. And we're always having to salvage something from it. So, in terms of some sort of long-term horizon, well, I mean, we don't know how long things take. Another Benjamin sort of argument is that any second of time might be the straight gate through which the Messiah enters. We don't know what's going to happen. But I do basically cleave to some hazily Hegelian idea that certain historical tendencies have to exhaust themselves and disclose their limitations before we can move on. In other words, we have to push through the contradictions, whatever the situation is we're in. So if you find yourself in a situation where you say, look, no change can be made, so I'm going to batten down the hatches and, you know, have what I call lifeboat socialism, you know, build up small mutual aid communities or whatever, understandable. But the problem with that is that ultimately you are still part of the wider society. You can try to succeed. You could try to, you know, there's been a whole centuries of traditions of this, trying to sidestep the question of revolution, the question of massive social transformation by forming a commune or by moving to America and setting up a new community there or whatever. I think Lorenzo Veracini has written very well about this. It doesn't work. Ultimately, you're still dependent on the society that you try to succeed from, and you end up internalizing the contradictions of that society in a very particular way. So yeah, we had no choice but to relate to the whole of the society and to contemplate spans of time that it would take to revolutionize that society. But the problem that we now have is the temporality of climate change and the temporality of social revolution, very different. We have to achieve massive transformations within the next few decades. We're not going to have a revolution in that time, so what are we going to do? Thus far, the way of sublating the contradiction has been a Green New Deal, a more radical Green New Deal, one that will activate democratic capacities, socializing tendencies, and so on. Fine, but we seem to be in a bit of a strategic deadlock with that too.
And salvage communism? You said already the idea. What is the idea of salvage communism? Maybe to wrap it up here, then we'll go to the question.
To retrieve what can be retrieved from the rubble, including the rubble of our own traditions, like in my case the International Socialist tradition. We mustn't have to give up on these proprietary ideas of communism. Healyism, Grantism, Cliffism, Trotskyism, whatever it happens to be, like, this is a loser, it's a dead end. it's over. Salvaging is working with what can be repurposed.
And repaired?
Repaired, yeah, mending.
Thank you. I think we'll go to the questions now. Hannah will come up, and Richard. You have your own mic now. Can I ask you to lend your mic to Hannah? And I'll ask Richard to do the difficult thing and be brief in his answers so we can take a few more questions, but we'll start with 3.
Okay, I would have 4.
That's okay? So then we'll see if we have time for another round. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm trying to reorganize the top 8 questions into 4. So I'm going to start at the bottom and not the top voted question for once, and try to bring those together. So there's 2. The one thing is, what would be the new forms of solidarities that we need? And also what happened to old internationalism? And I think going with that would also be the question, how do we manage to let people experience forms of collective solidarity and security instead of fighting downwards and falling into fascist promises? Should I do all the questions, or do you want to answer first?
I think we'll leave it there, and that's already 2 material questions, yeah? So we have the question on solidarity, like about the new forms of solidarity and how do we and others experience them, and what happened to old internationalism.
I'll take the second question first. In terms of what happened to the old internationalism, it depends what you mean. There have been succeeding forms of internationalism that have been important. There have been certain, for example, Cold War solidarities based upon, let's say, the Tricontinental Congress in Havana, and the expressions of solidarity in the global south. Basically, this was the non-aligned movement, people who didn't want to be either capitalist or part of the Eastern Bloc. That was one form of internationalism. There was the revolutionary internationalism of the first, second and third internationals, where essentially there was solidarity across labour unions and socialist parties and so on. There's the forms of internationalism that were anti-racist and anti-colonial. In the UK, we used to have something called political blackness. It's gone out of fashion, but it was basically the idea that if you are racially oppressed, you can call yourself black, and we're all part of the same struggle together. That was shattered in favour of identity essentialism and competitive essentialism and all the rest of it. So, there was the forms of internationalism forged around the anti-globalization or anti-capitalist movement, supplanted quickly by the internationalism of the anti-war movement. I think what happened is that for a long period of time, partly it was an early stage in the revival of the left. Left-wing movements turned to fighting their own ruling class over domestic battles. And that was part of a kind of revival of left social democracy. Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, and it was very much focused on domestic questions with some international dimension to it, but the international was not to the foreground. I think this was coterminous with the general retreat of globalization, economic globalization, and so on. I think since the Gaza genocide, I think there's been a recovery of a kind of anti-imperialist internationalism. The question, what I'm trying to get at is it's always specific to the moment, and it's always specific to certain kinds of alliances that can be formed, and what is the issue of the day? What are you being internationalist about? At one point it would have been trade organizations like the WTO, the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, the kinds of things that started to attack. That precipitated the anti-globalization, anti-capitalist movement. I think climate internationalism would be a good step forward. I think that would be an obvious horizon for us, but we struggle to build the kinds of resilient, lasting global infrastructures that could coordinate action on a scale that is needed. I'm sorry, the other question was about forms of solidarity. I've written it down.
New forms of solidarity, which ones, I think, and how to experience them.
Oh, I see, okay. New forms of solidarity. I don't know. We don't know. That's the good thing about it. We know that it's not just going to be a repeat of the, we're going to build up cooperatives and unions like in the 19th century as a kind of defensive organizations in class struggle gradually becoming offensive. We don't know what the patterns of organization will be. We just have to build from what's available. So in terms of, one thing that I'm very, I'm not pessimistic about is that over the years there's been a multiplication of axes of politicization. It's not just, race, sex, gender, and so on, although that's very important. Many aspects of life and sort of the reproductive dimensions of capitalism have become politicized in a very open way, and so there are going to be forms of solidarity that we don't anticipate. How do we help people experience solidarity? Well, that's the $1,000 question. I think I just want to place that answer in the context of we are in a context of, I would say, general social evisceration. There's a term that is often used, atomization, and it's become a cliche. But I think if we think about what that term means, it's a violent term. It means something being smashed into atoms, which is exactly what has happened to the social body with decades of violent political action against unions, against social movements, growing carceral politics, forms of repression. And I think that people are becoming accustomed to isolation. Now, this is not a general thing across the board. You wouldn't find exactly this kind of politics in India, for example, where there are other forms of civic action which are quite threatening and dangerous in some ways. There is a dark side to civil society. But nonetheless, I think, in terms of how do we help people experience this solidarity, I think partly it's going to be about rebuilding civil society. It's I think in part, what you're doing is you're setting up social events, maybe like this one, where people can actually be with one another and hang out. You know that all the statistics show that younger generations, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to patronize younger people here, but this is just what the data shows. Younger generations are less interested in hanging out with friends, have fewer friends, less interested in dating, and even the drugs they do are less social. Well, I would know, but apparently, like it used to be ecstasy and beer and fags and what have you, and now it's ketamine and whatever else. Maybe there's an element of moral panic in some of this, and I would hate to speculate. I also think that sometimes when you chastise younger people, it's chastising people for having a better time than you, which I do resent. But I do think that there is a general pattern of social decay, so rebuilding opportunities for a social life would be a step forward. I'm sorry I went on a bit.
We can, keep going with that after the event. Two more from Hannah, if you would lend your mic again. Sorry, we only have two and the moderator can never hand off the mic.
Okay, then I'm going to go with the top-rated question. How do we stop everything from getting worse, and how are chances of progressive societies before climate collapse? And I would add another question. Do we need a bloody revolution at high costs, or can we still change the system without a breakdown? Very easy questions.
Small and easy questions, thank you. So the second question was, do we need a bloody revolution, or is there a peaceful version? And the first question was, how do we stop everything from getting worse? How do we still achieve a better society in all of this mess? Did I paraphrase? Before climate collapse, okay, I think it's a good paraphrase, yes.
Okay, so again, second question first because it's the easier one. Do we need bloody revolution? I think it would be a mistake to think about revolution in terms of, as I used to when I was a young man, in terms of a big day, when everything happens, we all show up and we kick out the Tsar and storm the Winter Palace. Western societies are not really like that kind of society. Gramsci was onto that already. You know, like a revolution in modern times is really a fight within civil society. So when the Egyptian revolution happened, we had to take seriously the reality of counter-revolution, which was not just the generals locking up the Muslim Brothers and massacring people. It was a big part of right-wing civil society which hated this new democracy and wanted it shut down, right? And that's just a political revolution. We're not talking about social revolution here. So when I think about revolution, I think we're talking about a process of collective mobilization that has to confront necessarily the Vendées, the counter-revolution, the organized, especially organized middle-class reaction against the revolution, which will probably arm itself. The capitalist class will, of course, defend itself, but you know, capitalists never do anything for themselves. They hire other people to do it. That's why they're capitalists. And so you will find, that they will form alliances with the middle-class counter-revolution if you ever get to the point of being able to wage a revolutionary struggle. I'm just saying that whether it turns bloody or not, it's not really in your control. If you try and seize control of the society from the people who currently enjoy the benefit of it or control it, they're going to bring a fight to you. I do think it would be helpful if we didn't get into any romance about armed force, or think that our job is to learn how to use guns or anything like that. And I do think that quite often, since violence is not where we have our major strength, it's a tactical and strategic mistake to organise on that lines anyway, because we're going to lose. You know, if you take up arms against the state, they've got way more arms than you. But, you know, look at most social movements, look at the civil rights movement. Yeah, there's an image that it was all peaceful, but actually, you know, you had to be armed, especially against the Ku Klux Klan and, you know, the white citizens movement and all the rest of it. Meaning that there will come points where you might have to use defensive or offensive violence, which, I mean, I'm talking about when there's a real struggle and the stakes are high, which, you know, it's not in your control. You don't get to control that. You may not want it, you may resist it, but it will be put in your court. And the question then is, you know, like, it's not going to be ultimately decided by violence, it's who's got the superior support. So it's a political question. I'm sorry I'm rambling a bit here because it's not a simple question.
I thought you made an excellent point. The first question was, how do we stop everything from getting worse? Can we still have, I think the question was, a progressive society in the face of ecological catastrophe?
Yes, I don't think that we can necessarily avoid the consequences that are already baked in. That's one thing. So in some senses, some things are just going to get worse. But there are different ways for things to get worse, and there's a question of who pays the price, who shoulders the cost. The people who benefit from keeping society as it is, or will they be successfully able to push the costs onto the poor? I think a big question with climate change is a lot of the denialism in the global north in particular, but not just in the global north, is based on the idea that, look, ultimately, you know, we don't believe it's real, but ultimately if it is real, well, I mean, who cares if some people in these poor countries die off? They're overpopulated anyway, there's too many of them. So there's a kind of argument about infrahumanity. They can pay the costs. So, and actually, you know, quite a lot of technocratic climate management kind of accepts that, you know, like, yeah, well, we're not going to overthrow capitalism, so of course we're not going to do that, so some people are going to pay the cost. Well, tacitly we're going to let poor people pay the cost again. And we're going to make empty promises that we're going to pay them so many billions so they can make the transition and not do it. But in terms of the basic idea of progress, I think the way I would encourage you to think about this is in terms of teleology. Now, teleology has a bad rap. What it means is that there is a process that has a purpose. It has a goal. And we've been told for decades, teleology is very bad because history doesn't have goals. History doesn't move towards some sort of final outcome. That's bombastic Marxist talk from the 1920s when we all thought it was going to be revolutions everywhere. We can no longer afford those illusions. What I would say to you is that what teleology actually means, whether you're talking about an organism or a society, is that something has an innate normative orientation, a striving. Like, for example, a human organism has a tendency, a striving towards a phenotypic peak, a peak of development, which is the adult human. That's its normative striving. It doesn't necessarily reach that goal. There could be all sorts of things that go wrong, right? And there are different ways in which you can reach that goal, but that is its basic normative striving. And what I'm saying is, I think a socialist project, a radical project, any kind of progressive project you like, has to have within it the basic idea that there is in humanity, in the human species, at least in the human species, and I would say in all species, some sort of striving towards an ultimate horizon. And that ultimate horizon has to be one in which there is mending and reconciliation, in which there is improvement, in which there is universality, in which there is justice, and in which, even more important than justice, there is mercy. For one another and for ourselves. And that has to be a real historical tendency. Now, if you don't believe that, then you're going to have trouble grounding your commitment to socialism or to radical change, whatever it happens to be. So I would say, if you want to think about progress, think about what is, and have a real think about this, what is it in us that justifies the claim that we can build socialism out of human beings?
Thank you so much. I think that was beautiful, and I think we're going to leave it at that. Before we finish, just let it settle for a moment. And before we finish, we usually like to ask our guests to show us their strength also in the practical aspects of the struggle. So, if you haven't been here before, you have the German version, which is much catchier than the English translation of this Marx quote: to overthrow all relations, I need to write it down then, all relations in which man is a debased and enslaved, an abandoned, despicable being, can never get the order right, alle Verhältnisse umzuwerfen. Thank you, Hannah. So we have here our excellent high score of guests of this season. We have both Cecilia Rickerba and Inga Solti at one can that they managed to throw down. It's okay if it takes several attempts. Nobody should be re-traumatized from any gym lesson or carnival experience. For those who haven't been here, Cecilia really, the first try didn't get anything, and then the second try, I think she hit this can and threw it straight out, and the rest was left standing, which led to some pretty interesting talks about pillars of power and the whole thing. So, Richard, that's a very good question, because we put it in a different spot than usual. Where do you want to stand? I think somewhere where your chair is, no? Yeah, I think you're a bit farther than the others, but everybody according to their...
All right.
Okay.
This is capitalism.
Yes, this is the whole thing. Good luck.
I'm really bad at sports.
Several attempts, so we're just taking off some pressure. 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's 7. Yes, okay. Which leaves me with the question, here's the chalk. So, thank you, Richard, for playing and being a little bit silly with us. We can sit back down. Before we leave, just some very short info and then we'll let you all go. Thank you all for coming, of course. The next date in this series will be on the 1st of June. My guest will be Eleonora Roldan-Mendeville, and we will talk about why diversity is not enough. You might know her, she wrote a book with Bafta Sabo, Die Diversität der Ausbeutung. If you've gotten curious about ATTAC and who we are and what we do, on the 27th of April, there's an ATTAC Kennenlernen. Meet ATTAC. You can also become a member of ATTAC. ATTAC is politically independent. We don't have any major public funding or corporate donation, no corporate donations. So we're independent, and it's really important to keep it that way and to keep our finances stable or make them more stable, to be honest. So you can become a member of ATTAC and support our work in this way. And that leaves me with thanks. First of all, thank you, Richard, for coming all the way to the UK for our event today. We really appreciate it. And so an applause for that. Big money or put them in fancy hotels, so we really appreciate that you're doing this. And then, of course, my thanks goes out to the ATTAC team who make this possible every time. Most of all, Silly, who gets most of my funny ideas and everybody who helped today, Lena, Sarah, Hannah, and everybody else. And of course, thank you to Flug for hosting us for this and who've been our partners in this for 3 years, and we're hoping to go on for a 4th year in the fall. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It was great to have you here. Thank you for sticking with us. Have a good night and keep on fighting.